They were young and brave. A special day one continues.
We intend to convince the communists that we cannot be defeated by force of arms. I have today ordered to Vietnam the Air Mobile Division.
In the summer of 1965, the U.S. was still not committed to a full-scale war in Southeast Asia. But President Johnson wanted to escalate the American commitment and introduce the North Vietnamese to a new kind of warfare. Air cavalry, infantry troops transported by helicopter. The U.S. believed this was the fastest, most flexible fighting force in the world. But the enemy was eager to see just how tough these legendary Americans really were. So they followed an old Vietnamese saying, if you want to fight the tiger, you must first lure him out of the mountain. First, they baited the trap. Here, seen publicly for the first time, is the war through enemy eyes, footage from Vietnam's military archives. A U.S. helicopter shot down. North Vietnamese troops pouring along the Ho Chi Minh Trail to the central highlands of South Vietnam. They set up base camps near the Cambodian border and waited. And the tiger came. The 7th Air Cavalry Regiment was ordered to seek and destroy the enemy sanctuaries. The man for the job was Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore. Did you have any idea how many North Vietnamese were sitting out there waiting?
None whatsoever, no.
Colonel Moore's 1st Battalion had been told to search for the enemy in a remote area along the border called the Ia Drang Valley. Moore decided he would set his helicopters down in a clearing at the base of a mountain range. The clearing was designated Landing Zone X-Ray. The mission was set for November 14th, 1965.
Intelligence that I had was that there was an unknown number of enemy in the vicinity of where I was going to be sent.
The pilot in Hal Moore's lead chopper was Major Bruce Crandall.
We went low level, and the formations are very tight, and we get right down in the treetops.
Bearing is 240 to the LZ.
28 years later, Hal Moore and Bruce Crandall are again finding their way to Landing Zone X-Ray. With them on this journey are the Vietnamese commanders who fought against them in the Ia Drang Valley.
Right below us.
Soon, X-Ray is in sight, looking just as it did 3 decades ago.
I was the first guy on the ground in the assault. We had quiet for about 30 minutes.
Remarkably, these scenes were captured by 2 U.S. Army cameramen who were also at Landing Zone X-Ray during Moore's mission.
It was an ominous quiet. I looked up at this mountain, and I knew we were under observation. I just knew it.
What Moore did not know and could not see was that he had landed almost on top of the base camp for hundreds of North Vietnamese soldiers who couldn't quite believe what they were seeing.
I hadn't heard that kind of noise before.
Colonel Vu Dinh Thuoc of the Vietnamese People's Army.
We are farmers, so we thought it was tractors. Then I realized what they were. We called them planes that lift straight up. We could see the Americans and how bright red their faces were.
We ran right across this creek bed firing our weapons into these trees and met no resistance. Very happy about that, because I had a whole battalion to bring in.
Moore had one very big problem. X-Ray could only fit enough helicopters to put 80 men on the ground at a time. Moore had to use those few men to protect the landing zone until the rest could arrive.
I ordered my men to cut the Americans off from the helicopters and trap them there.
Standing against Hal Moore was General Nguyen Huan of the People's Army. He'd been hoping the Americans would come to visit.
You cannot fight a tiger in its cave. You must drag it out. So if an enemy force stays on its base, protected by barbed wire and mines, it is difficult to defeat.
As the next wave of troops began to set down in the clearing, some of the men Moore had sent forward returned with a surprise.
We captured a prisoner. He was unarmed, and this prisoner told us there are 3 battalions of North Vietnamese on the mountain, and they want very much to kill Americans and have not been able to find any. And at that point, I knew we were in for it.
3 battalions of North Vietnamese, 1,600 men. The Americans were outnumbered 10 to 1. Now, protecting the landing zone meant life or death. Moore ordered 2 platoons to push up the mountain. Second Lieutenant Henry Herrick led one of those platoons, and he was much too eager for a fight. Herrick came upon some North Vietnamese scouts and pursued them deeper into the woods. Lieutenant Dennis Deal saw Herrick's platoon pull away.
Henry Herrick had fallen for a 4th grade sucker play by the North Vietnamese. They had hung a couple of people, I guess, out in a clearing, and he took off after them. I don't know why he just didn't shoot them.
It was a trap. Out of contact with the rest of the company, Herrick's platoon was quickly surrounded and attacked. Fighting to stay alive, they became known as the Lost Platoon. Hundreds more of the enemy streamed past the platoon toward the clearing. Hearing the distant gunfire, Moore sent his men forward to meet the assault. Then, the battle erupted. 1,600 enemy against, by this point, 150 Americans.
They jump up right in front of you, 5 yards in front of you, 4 yards, hand-to-hand combat. Guys sticking bayonets in each other's chests. It was close. It was close.
In the middle of the fighting was 22-year-old Bill Beck and his best friend, Russell Adams. Together, they manned an M60 machine gun.
So you and Russell Adams were right about where the tree was. We were using that tree as cover to the left of us to protect us. You know, when the bullets crack over your head and snap the air and hit the ground beside you, and dust flies and the bark on the tree shatters and breaks off, you know they're aiming at you. That's what happened to Russell Adams.
When the battle was less than an hour old, a bullet split open Adams' helmet and pierced his skull.
And he laid there motionless and tried talking. Nothing would come out. And his eyes were open. He was staring at the sky. And his head was split wide open. And I never seen anything like that in my life. And I was horrified.
Now Bill Beck took over the machine gun alone and put up a furious wall of fire, protecting the company's flank for 2 hours.
When his time came to perform for America and for the men around him, Beck did the job.
28 years later, back at his old position, Beck made a remarkable find.
Look, it's part of a GI helmet. That could be my buddy Russell's, Russell Adams, when he got shot in the head. Look at it, rotted out over 30 years. I don't want to see this guy. I got to take us home. God bless you, buddy.
Russell Adams managed to survive the fight. He and other wounded were taken for treatment to Moore's makeshift command post. More than 50 men were there by the end of that first hour, with a dozen dead piled nearby. Now, Moore sensed the enemy shifting to an exposed part of the clearing, and he made a calculated gamble. He would leave the rear of the clearing completely exposed and protect the area where he thought the enemy would strike. Charlie Company's captain was just landing.
I ran out in the landing zone, was under fire, and I yelled at him to move his company over to the left as quickly as he could and get ready to be attacked. And I hollered at him, move!
We came in here. Our other forces went over there. The plan was to encircle the Americans. Then the order came to attack.
Moore's gamble paid off. His men got to the right place just moments before that assault began.
We realized after a few minutes that it was a standoff. I ordered most of the left flank to withdraw.
They would have had a straight shot across this landing zone. Right to your rear.
You'd have been finished.
Well, Most likely, we'd have gone down fighting.
In combat, I don't think he had a peer. Tremendous, brave, solid person. No time was he ever overexcited. Never reacted without having good plans, without having an idea of what he was going to do.
As the battle stretched through the afternoon, a UPI reporter named Joe Galloway tried to convince a chopper pilot to set him down at X-ray.
The biggest story in Vietnam was happening 1,500 feet below my feet, and I wanted to be there. Felt it was my job.
Joe would stand up to you and look you in the eye and tell you what he thought. And he carried a rifle, and I like that. So when I heard that Joe Galloway wanted to come in and join us in the fight at X-ray, and I said, okay, if he's that crazy and wants to come in, put him on a helicopter.
When night came and the enemy fire died down, Joe Galloway's chopper landed on the most dangerous terrain in Vietnam.
We jump out, we throw out all the ammo and all the water, and then we duck into the grass, and the birds go out, and we're waiting. And out of the darkness comes this voice. I'll take you to the command post, but watch where you step. There's lots of bodies out here, and they're all American.
But the worst place of all that night was 200 yards out from X-ray, with the survivors of the lost platoon.
I ordered my men to eliminate that platoon, but they met with fierce resistance. I suppose that when they had to choose between life and death, the Americans chose life.
The platoon survivors had dug in. All but 3 of them were wounded, and all the leaders were killed. Now, a junior sergeant, Ernie Savage, did the only thing he could. Using a radio taken from a dead officer, he called in artillery fire. Today, Ernie Savage is taking us to the lost platoon's position.
Our
Vietnamese military escort is nervous about live artillery shells still lying around.
How close were you calling the artillery in?
Right here, as close as we could get it. 30 to 40 meters it was falling. That's 105 ammunition was falling that close to us.
You were calling the artillery literally in on your heads.
Well, that's where they were. That's where the enemy was.
Finally, on the morning of the second day, the lost platoon was rescued. The gamble to call in the artillery had paid off, and now the real danger was back in the clearing, where the enemy was breaking through the lines. Hal Moore sent out a distress call, Broken Arrow.
Which meant an American unit in great trouble and about to be overrun. And that code word meant that every available fighter bomber aircraft in South Vietnam had to come to the aid of that unit.
Napalm was on its way in. The only problem, 2 of the planes had the wrong coordinates.
And I looked off to my right, and there were 2 F-100 Super Sabres coming right at us at a height of probably 60 feet.
And I heard the howling. The colonel was really yelling, "Get that SOB off of us. Get him off. Call him off."
I couldn't do anything about these 2 cans that had already been dropped, which dropped right in my command post amongst some of my men.
The heat just sort of shriveled your face. And you can see those men dancing in the flames, and you've just been talking to them.
And someone said, "Get this man's legs." And when I picked him up, the boots and the flesh on his ankle came off in my hands.
And I felt those bones. I still do. It's very hard. It's a very difficult memory.
I was right.
Moore told the air controller to forget the mistake and keep the air power coming. And now the battle turned in favor of the Americans.
It was like a sea of fire. If you saw the bombing, you would have thought we had all died here. It was devastating. The closer we got, the more of us died.
My command post was not sheltered at all. I had nowhere to hide. So I would just stare up at the sky to see how you did these bombing runs.
Bill Beck was also watching the sky and saw the price one of the U.S. pilots paid to protect the men on the ground.
He came down, and as he was leveling off to go back up, he got shot from underneath and exploded his the napalm or gasoline tank, or maybe fragments from the bomb he dropped came up and hit him because he was that low to the ground, and he exploded. The plane was full of flames, and he went right across the treetops. And I lay there, up there, laying like that, like that. I looked. Right treetop level, I looked him right in the eyes. Went right down there and killed. What a show.
The air assault was too much, and the North Vietnamese finally withdrew from the battlefield. U.S. estimates calculated as many as 1,000 enemy dead.
They left scores of their dead laying around, a very sad sight. Stinking battlefield.
Considering the ferocity of the battle, the U.S. came out well. 79 GIs and airmen killed, 121 wounded. But these were still the worst casualties taken in a single battle since U.S. forces came to Vietnam.
People say, what'd you fight for and everything? Hell, we fought for each other. We fought for survival. I mean, it was for one another. I was trying to save his butt because I knew he's going to save mine, and vice versa. We were a team. We were brothers.
You were the first man of your battalion on the ground. Were you the last man off?
I was the last man to step on a helicopter, yes.
What went through your mind?
I felt guilt that I was still alive.
Guilt. Why?
Well, when your men die and you don't, you feel guilty. You're the leader. That's all I can say.
At American headquarters in Saigon, they felt differently. There, they measured the American dead against the Vietnamese dead and called the battle a great victory. What they didn't know was that the battle was far from over. The North Vietnamese had more surprises waiting in the Ia Drang Valley. And this time, the Americans would not be ready for them.